This conference will now be recorded.
Eat a bite of egg. Can you hear us now, guys? I've changed our mic setting. Okay. So, thank you. Yes, thank you very much, guys. Thank you. Okay. I'll let Emily start over again since I don't know how much of you guys actually heard what she said. Okay.
Okay. So anyway, what I was saying is this is the form that has been very frustrating for me as we have not received this back correctly almost ever. There's typically a lot of information that has been filled in incorrectly, and I've had to basically go to all the counties of all of Oregon and find the correct data. So it's been very frustrating for me, and I'm not able to get properties in quick enough for you guys because I'm having to go back and do research to get the correct information. So if I can get these correct, that'd be super helpful. But first, I want to show you where to find it. So in the forms here, we need to go to the Oregon DataShare library. So we're used to looking in MLS and we're used to looking in the Oregon real estate forms. But we need to go to Oregon DataShare, which is the shared database with Southern Oregon. And in there, you'll be able to find this residential property data form, and as well as the new change order. So that is what we're looking at here. And so, as you can see, it's a lot different than Rappatonni's, but it's very nice, and that has a bunch of drop-down menus as well in this. So a lot of the information is already pre-filled out for you. So all we need here is, so listing number and co-listing number are obviously very straightforward. The street number, the modifier, if you don't know what that is, that would be something like in Sun River, how they go by the lot number instead of the street address. So the listing that we have down in Sun River right now on Sunrise, we have the actual street number here, but the modifier is 3 because it's on lot 3, and that is how Sun River agents view those. And then down here as well is the commonly known address where you can put something like that in. Then this part's all pretty straightforward, but here is the parcel number. This is the #1 thing that I get incorrect almost every time. So, where is it?
Would be in here. Click on that. Then just move it.
Okay, so in dial here, let's put in just a regular house. Okay, so this is my house. So when I am looking for that number, a lot of people are giving me this, a lot of people are giving me parts of things or nothing at all. This is the number I need right here, the 6-digit number. That is how our county records are looking these things up now. So when we're putting in numbers, I need this. So that's what I would put right here, and that's how the county finds everything for Flex now. So does everyone understand that? Are there any questions so far? Doesn't look like there's questions. Oh, can they change the description to account number? I don't know, can they?
I don't know.
That would be a forms thing and might not be so easy to do, but this is how Southern Oregon has always seen this. And so that's why it's like that.
We always used to use the tax map and tax number. So the figure that Emily always pulled up there on dial, that no longer works on our new forms. And so that's one of the major things that she's always trying to find. It's really the account number for the tax, for the county tax records. So that's the parcel number that they're looking for. So that's a big thing. And when we're getting these things filled out the way we used to have them in Rappatonny, other county websites. Good question, Holly.
So in other counties, they're often 4 digits or 5 digits. So I would really probably have Escrow help you if you're not familiar with the county and have them pull a trio for you. That way they get the correct information, and they're reaching out to the escrow companies in those respective counties often to help with it. So I would definitely use your escrow to help with that, as well as you could do the research yourself, but it is definitely a pain. I've done a lot of research in a lot of different counties, and it's very difficult to find a lot of the assessor information. So yeah, I would definitely just use escrow to help if you're not familiar with the dial system of that county. So anyway, here, this isn't, so we know commonly known address, cross street, section, subdivision name. Here's the next part that is constantly having errors: tax map number, tax lot, and tax block. So none of this means anything from what Rappatonny meant. So when I'm entering data here, my tax map number is actually just this section right here. So I am looking for that first 6 digits and the 2 letters. So that's all I need for tax map. When I'm looking for tax lot and tax block, what that actually means is just the lot and block number. So I know tax lot was typically these last 5, but that's not what the Flex system wants. They actually want here this for my lot number, and they want this for the block. So we're not doing that last 5 digits. So does that make sense to everyone? Because I know this is completely different and it's a completely new way of thinking because it's not what Rapatoni wanted. So, and I've gotten it wrong almost every time as well. Doesn't look like there's any questions on that.
And if you have questions, feel free to unmute your mic and just ask. We are checking the chat regularly, but still, if you do have questions, feel free to unmute and ask.
Okay. So anyway, and here, so our lot size, that's all. You don't need to fill out lot size square feet. It auto-populates in the system, so I just need the acres like normal. Additional parcels I've gotten incorrectly as well, because some people were thinking that it may be common ground that is within the community that they technically have ownership in. And it's not that. Additional parcels is only if you're selling an additional actual piece of land to go with it. So the neighboring property is also for sale with this. And that's where you would put that in. So again, here, list price is normal. So listing contract date is the date that we want it live in Flex, or the date of the contract for coming soon. Projected active date is going to be when we're actually putting it active, should it be a coming soon listing. But when we put these in as coming soon, I often put the projected date out further because we've had these things automatically go live because the system will do that at midnight on the day of activation and the listing's not ready yet. So I'll often throw this date out just to make sure we are ready to go. So, okay. Here's another one that's often wrong, agency representation. So right here is a little drop down, and a lot of these have it, these little drop down things that tell you what can be filled in each section. So in agency representation, we are almost always yes. In our Rapatoni, we were always yes. So there's almost no reason to ever click a no unless you have a really interesting client who doesn't want a true agency representation, or it's other times.
I'm going to interject right here. Our MLSCO listing contract always has us with agency representation. It just so happens in Southern Oregon, their listing contract is different. So you can pick you can pick a different type of representation. But for our local MLSCO, it's always agency representation, always. So you would always fill that out unless something is happening if you're changing our listing contract. And if you're doing that, we should talk about it because we don't change that without some important thing. Usually it involves an attorney on the other side. And then the listing agreement, go ahead, Emily.
So with this listing agreement, I'm getting exclusive agency a lot, and that's also something we almost never do. That allows the seller to sell it on their own and not pay you a commission if they find a buyer. So it's almost always exclusive right to sell.
And that's also in our listing contracts as well. We have agency representation and its exclusive right to sell. So again, Southern Oregon, this was a concession to Southern Oregon when we combined our DataShare, because they do take listings differently than we do in Central Oregon. But please keep it yes with the agency representation and exclusive right to sell.
And then our buyer agency compensation, this is where you put the amount and then the type. So here it has the drop down for dollar or percent. And then here is another drop down for fixed or tier. I've maybe once seen a tiered commission. We almost always do fixed.
Yes. And that was actually another concession with Southern Oregon. They had never seen a tiered concession, a tiered commission before. We have had it here in Central Oregon since I've been licensed, and it happens every now and then in which someone wants to say you're going to get paid 3% on the first 50,000 of the selling price, and then 2.5% on the next 75,000, things like that. That's a tiered commission, but typically it is a fixed percentage of 2.5%, 3%, whatever you can negotiate with your client.
Okay. So then going down here, again, a lot of these have drop downs. So if you're ever looking for anything or wondering what to fill out in zip forms, it already has these drop downs ready for you. So you don't need to be handwriting these things in, because often that's incorrect of what I'm able to fill in. What's in these drop downs is what I'm able to actually choose from in the system. I can't type things in. So, and then all of this is pretty straightforward. One thing that happens often here is when we go occupant type and we're throwing in tenant, when I'm entering this into Flex, 2 fields immediately come up that I am required to fill in and almost are never filled in here. And it's extremely difficult because I'm now having to put in data that's inaccurate or causing issues because it looks like the lease is super long or something. But I'm basically now required here to fill in that it is rented, and I have to now fill in what the rent is and what the lease end date is. So I need fields for both of these should there be a tenant. So I just need to know, because often I'll have to throw in $1 because I don't know what the rent is, or I'll have to throw in the end of the year or the end of the month or whatever, but by that time it's already out of date and there still may be a tenant.
So it's important to have this data correct when you're taking your listing, because if we do have a tenant, these other fields are required, and we cannot activate the listing unless these are filled in. So again, if Emily's putting in something incorrect, if the push is to get this done as quickly as possible, and the thing is that's wrong, and so she'll go back and ask, can you give me this information? But in the meantime, it's going out on a portal inaccurate. Yeah.
So, and the rest of that is pretty straightforward there. So I'm not getting much of this back incorrect, so this is fine. One thing people are missing is their preferred escrow company and officer. So this is often not filled out, and then it comes back to it where there's an issue and we get a contract where people are just writing their own escrow companies, and then the listing agent gets frustrated because they're not getting their preferred escrow company and they're having to counter it all the time. So it'd be helpful if this gets filled out. I know it's hard, it's very easy to miss. I've missed it countless times as well. And then FERPTA, that is one that people are putting in incorrect a lot as well. I'm getting a lot of yeses when the people selling the property are in fact residents.
American citizens.
Yep, they're American citizens. So this is only to be marked no if you are a foreign investor. So if your seller is from, I don't know, from Canada and they own property here.
To be marked yes.
Yes. It's marked yes if they're, they say they're from Canada and they purchased property here and they are not American citizens. So then here, I know you want to talk about this.
Yes, I wanted to mention a little bit here about the audio surveillance on premises. Yes, no. Video surveillance on premises. Yes, no. This last week we actually had I have a story to share with you about this. We have a listing in which there is connected with the doorbell audio surveillance. So you ring the doorbell and there is a camera that comes on, and we're disclosing that there is audio surveillance on the premises in this listing, and video. We also have video in this one too. Just so happens that people who are showing this property are not paying attention, and they are talking about the property. They are talking about the condition of the property. They're talking about what they intend to offer on the property. They're talking about that they think that the person who lives in the property is vaping in the property. And it just so happens that the person who's living in the property is not vaping in the property and is most offended by this. We also have information regarding what an intended offer is to be. I have mentioned this before at office meetings. Always assume that someone is recording you when you are showing property. And in this case, we are to disclose it. So have this discussion when you're taking your listing. Is there a video connected with the doorbell? And if so, we need to say, yes, there is video surveillance on the premises. We are to disclose this to people who are showing property, but also when you are showing property, be sure to be aware of that. And even if it's not marked, make assumptions that it is, especially if it's something that your clients are very interested in, and warn them before you show the property. If this is something that's really interesting to you, let's not talk about making an offer unless we're out of the property, because there might be someone recording us and it could hurt us in our negotiations. So something really to be aware of. And like I say, in this one scenario for our listing, we know what people are thinking about this property because of the audio video surveillance that's happening. So be aware of that.
So continuing on, so here in the remarks, so it's great when it gets typed in here, but often the document gets changed from the original formatting enough that I no longer can just copy and paste it. So I'm having to retype your remarks almost every time as well, and that takes a ton of time. So just as a courtesy, if any of you could possibly just send it to me in an email or as a Word document on the side, then that makes my life so much faster, so I can just copy and paste over and don't have to retype all of your words.
And less chance of accidental typos that way too.
Yeah.
Unless you've made typos yourself. But
I try and catch them.
yeah, but still.
So I don't think there's a whole lot more for me to really go over, other than in this form, anything that has required and is underlined, I need an answer for. So if you're sending me these forms and I don't have an answer for architectural style, or I don't have an answer here for common walls, which common walls is almost always missed, because even single family residences need to have no common wall marked. So just make sure that anything that's underlined and has this required on it has an answer for me. So that way I know what needs to be filled in these fields. So like cooling here, a lot of homes don't have any cooling systems, so we need to have none.
What's next?
The maximum number of characters to use for remarks is 1,000 with spaces. So yeah, 1,000 with spaces in here. And private remarks, did they go up to 1,000 as well?
I think so.
Okay, private remarks went up to 1,000 as well. So you can write to your heart's content, and things you can't fit into the remarks that you really want to say, or your seller really wants to say, you can always caption the photos. So when you're going through the photos, they'll have text on them to basically describe anything special. So say they have an outdoor kitchen that has a specific kind of range and is really fancy. When you show that photo, you can type in all of that specific information there if you cannot fit it in these remarks. I think the rest of this is, yeah, the rest of this I get pretty accurate since this is just checking boxes at this point. I do get this wrong though, special listing conditions. This is a required field as well. Almost always it'll be standard. So I get real estate owned a lot. That is not what you think it means. It is not that the real estate is owned by the seller. There's a little more description in Flex of what it is, but this is not what you want to be choosing. You want to choose standard.
Now, real estate owned is basically, it's a bank that's foreclosed on the property. It's an REO property. It's someone who has foreclosed on something. So that would also be like a bankruptcy property, or a bankruptcy property could also be something that's going through bankruptcy or in foreclosure. But REO, we all know from having dealt with the recession, real estate owned is traditionally something that has been foreclosed on, and now whoever's foreclosed on it is now selling it. So in that case, they really don't know a lot about the property, and that's why when they fill out the seller's disclosure statement, they're only filling out the first page, which basically says they're exempt because they really don't know anything. So anyway, that's something to be aware of. But yes, it's traditionally in this market right now, it's standard for the special listing conditions, because most people are not in short sale or not in foreclosure. Yeah.
Okay. So I don't think there's really anything else that's inaccurate that I see. Are there any questions that we haven't answered yet?
Feel free to unmute your mic and ask if you have questions on that.
I'm sorry, I got interrupted, but on the end lease date, what did you say if there was no end, what we were supposed to put?
So are you talking about if it's a month to month?
Right, or it, yeah, just open-ended.
Yeah, so I have to put a date. So you can, I mean, it'd be nice if they were able to put in a field for month to month because that's very frustrating.
Yeah.
So I've often, if it is month to month, I've just thrown in the end of the month, and then we described it in agent remarks that it is a month to month lease, and how long they've been there for the reasons of removing the tenant.
Yeah.
But yeah, month to month leases right now are not simple to put in. So often I've just been putting the end of whatever month we're entering it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and that's a good comment there, Colleen. I am actually on the committee, the joint committee with Klamath Falls and Southern Oregon that kind of reviews this regularly, and that's an excellent comment. That'd be great. And Sheila, that's a good idea as well too. Send out to everybody a copy and highlight the areas and how to do it the correct way. That's a good idea.
Yeah.
Like even showing the section on the dial report. We could do that. Good comment there, Sheila. Thank you. Any other questions on this form? Okay, if not, I wanted to now jump into the buyer service agreement and share a story with you. So let me pop up the buyer service agreement here. And I know you guys have seen this before. We have talked about this a number of times, and it is a contract, unlike our listing contracts. Whenever we get a listing, we always have a contract to show we have the right to sell this property. But when we're working with our buyers, we have very few who actually utilize this contract. This is a buyer representation agreement. I know the reason why a lot of people have a problem doing it. It's like, well, if I'm doing a bad job, I don't want to throw this in front of them, or if they think I'm not doing a good job, they should have the right to go use somebody else. I get that. However, this is also a document which protects you from all your efforts and hard work on their behalf, but it also protects the buyer from going into an open house somewhere and having that on-site agent give them a pressure technique, say, you got to sign up right now and buy this today because it's going to be gone tomorrow. And so this is a great tool, and I know it is somewhat awkward for people to use, but I do want to share this with you. By the way, in some states, a buyer representation agreement is required, and so it doesn't become that big a deal. I know in Utah, if you're going to be working with a buyer, you get a buyer contract, and there you go. But in this case, this scenario that I wanted to share with you involved a listing that we have in which there is a tenant in the property. And the tenant is interested in buying a house themselves. They cannot afford the house they're living in, but they can afford something else. And actually, the tenant is not the buyer. It's the tenant's grandmother who will be the buyer. And so our broker who has this listing obviously has been communicating very much with this tenant in order to get the listing ready for ready for the market, but also in discussing things with them, found out that they were interested in buying a house. So did send off to grandmother a buyer representation agreement, and grandmother has signed this buyer representation agreement. In the meantime, living down the street from this house is an agent, a broker, who happens to know this tenant casually because they are neighbors, and had gone out with this, found out that the tenant was interested in a property and has gone out with this tenant showing them property, has spent time with them. And just so happened that our broker out there putting the sign out on the listing, but this guy walked up and introduced himself to our broker and said that he's showing property, and our broker has come back and said, well, are you aware that the tenant is not the buyer? It's actually the grandmother, and I have a buyer contract with that grandmother. That has stopped all showings by that broker of the tenant. And so moving forward, and again, our broker explained this to the tenant, because the tenant is the one who's looking for the houses. Grandmother doesn't live in town, but grandmother will buy whatever the tenant finds that works for her, that also fits within grandmother's budget. So it could have been a very, very awkward scenario, because this tenant does have a relationship with their neighbor, but when explained to the tenant, that's like, well, grandmother's buying this and grandmother has a contract with me, that has stopped the tenant from using anybody else. It's also made anybody else who may want to be showing property to that tenant recognize that, well, I can't interfere with this contract. So it's a very important document when used. And a lot of people say, well, how do I go about using it? Because I feel really awkward. I'm working with these people online. I've met them before, or I'm sending them information over the internet. They're on my MLS portal. They're receiving new documents or documents on new listings that come up board. But when do I actually pull this up and start using it? Now, we all know that we will spend hours and hours researching property, even when we don't have a buyer in town to work with, that we're trying to see if they're interested. I have found, and the brokers who use this contract on a regular basis have found, sometimes the best way of bringing this up is when you actually start showing them property. So it's a way of when you actually met them in person. And if you haven't yet given them the pamphlet, and again, you should probably have given them the pamphlet when you're starting to set them up on a portal. But if you haven't yet, or if you had done it earlier, it's a great opportunity to sit them down, like say in the conference room, and go over things and say, here's the pamphlet again. I wanted to explain to you again what agency is, because we're now actively showing property. And I wanted to reiterate what the listing agent's role is and what my role as your buyer's agent is. So here's the pamphlet again. You go over what agency is all about. Then you say, and by the way, here's another document that we use. It's called the Buyer Representation Agreement. This is a contract that basically says that you are not obligated to buy anything, but it's also a way of protecting me from all the time and energy and effort that I put in place to show you property, because I will be pre-screening property, I will be researching, I will spend hours and hours on your behalf. And again, I don't get paid until we have a closing. And there's no obligation for you to buy anything, but if you do, this basically says you will work with me. And then sometimes the buyer pipes up, it's like, well, this is the first I've met you. I know we've been corresponding for some time, but what if we decide that when we're working together that we don't work well? And then your response to that would be, look, this is a contract, and let's spend one day working together. Sign this document, and if we decide after one day of working together that we're not compatible, I'm not listening well enough to you, I am not responsive to your needs, or I'm not showing you the proper things, or our personalities just aren't clicking. And this goes both ways. Then let's just rip this thing up and we'll go our separate ways. You find someone else to work with you, and I will work with people who jive better with my personality. That's a way of overcoming that objection without being too pushy. The way this contract is set up, it's services between the broker and the client. You set it up for a time. You talk about what they're looking for in the residential property, general location, price range, terms, special features, whatever. And again, it talks about how the buyer's agent is an agent of the client in resulting transactions. So, and then the compensation. Now, this is something that's really interesting too. The client agrees to work exclusively with the broker, and upon successful sale shall pay the broker as follows. Most people will say commissions are paid by a seller, and there's a section in the back where you can note that. But say you're going to say, I expect to receive a 3% commission. Well, what's advertised in MLS is 2.5. You explain this to the broker, to your client, excuse me, to the buyer, and say, I'm going to get 3%, and this is why I'm worth 3%. And if the co-op commission is 2.5%, the buyer pays the additional 0.5 point. So this is a way you can negotiate a higher fee for your client. Or say the properties that they're looking at now, all of a sudden the commission is advertised in MLS at 2 or even 1.5%. And who knows what's going to happen with the market as things change. Here's a way you can still negotiate with the buyer to get paid their full commission. So, but again, the way I see most of these filled out, it's filled out with additional provisions. Seller pays all commissions, and commissions to be whatever is advertised in MLS. And so that way the buyer doesn't feel like they're out of pocket. But the first time I got a commission back that was contrary to what's in MLS, and I do look at that just to make sure we're not shorted or that referrals are appropriately paid out of closing. It was a lot, it was for more than the commission advertised in MLS. And I called our broker. I said, was there a mistake here? And I found out, oh, I had forgotten about the buyer service agreement, and he had negotiated a 3% commission, whereas the MLS was 2.5. So again, the buyer paid the difference. You guys have any questions on this? It is a great document, and in the case of our situation with our tenant there, who is a, grandma's client now, and we're looking for property, we're totally protected on that. Anyone else have questions on that and the use of this? And any other, for people who have used this, any thought process or any ideas of any better way of presenting it to a buyer? Anyone want to share anything on that? I have to say that as many times as I have discussed using the buyer agreement, the buyer contract, it's usually when someone has lost a client that they've been working with for 6 months, and they have shown them tens of houses, 50 houses, 100 houses, and then they find out that their client bought with somebody else, and they're heartbroken. And I always say, did you have a buyer contract? And it's like, no. It's usually they learn the hard way, and it's people feel awkward using it, but I think it's such a great protection, because again, if that buyer walks into that high pressure sales situation and that person on floor, or the person who's manning the model house, says, you've got to buy today, you have to buy today, otherwise you're going to lose out, then that buyer can come back and say, well, I have a contract with, whoever from our office, and I understood talking with them that you, listing agent, could fill out the contract on their behalf if they're not available to come running down here and fill out the forms with you. And that should stop that agent right away. I know for years and years of having worked over in Broken Top, this happened all the time when we were at the Broken Top sales office, and we'd have buyers walk in the door and say that they were interested, they tour around, look at a lot, they come back in and say, I really want that lot, I want to write it up. But my agent's not available. I know at our office, we'd write up all the time on behalf of that agent. So we'd fill out the form, and then we'd leave messages. This is before everything was so active with mobile phones. People didn't have cell phones, people didn't have, it was landlines, and so it was harder to get a hold of agents. But still, we would write things up on behalf of the other agent, and that was never an issue for us. But still, it's one of those things that a lot of people don't remember that can still be done. Another thing I wanted to mention, and this is something that I'm concerned about, because and I've talked with people about this, and I know that the people who have been moving to Bend lately, there's a lot of them who are coming from California. And I'm mentioning this just because I do know how litigious Californians are, and I hate to do a blanket statement about a whole bunch of people, but this is very true as a general population. People in California are more litigious than other people, and they are often looking for excuses and reasons to sue. Our errors and omissions service provider, our broker for our insurance for errors, our E&O policy is from California. And every year when we renew, he tells me, oh, the rates are just shooting up again in California because there are lawsuits all the time. Whereas we're still protected in Oregon, we just haven't had a lot of lawsuits. But knowing the mindsets of people who are coming to Oregon, a lot coming in from the Bay Area or from different places in California, and knowing that they are very willing to find fault with whatever happens that's negative in their transaction. I just want to make sure that we are really carefully abiding by our obligations as real estate professionals, as real estate agents representing buyers or sellers in their real estate transactions, and not overstepping our roles. For instance, we have someone who comes in and says, oh, I need, and we all do this all the time. I mean, we're showing property or we're representing a seller and the house is not quite show-worthy ready. We're whipping out the vacuum, we're vacuuming things up really quick, we're wiping down counters, we're putting things away to make it look better. And we often will step in there and help out with things like even packing things up to help make the property more show-worthy. But what happens when you take that vase and you put it in the box, and then that box gets dropped and the vase breaks, and you find out that vase is a $10,000 antique? Our E&O does not cover that, because we are not insured for packing up boxes. We're not insured for helping people move furniture. It is one of those things that I know we all do, but I'm concerned about us doing things like that. Another example, years and years ago, represented a high-end sale in which we also had the buyer, two different brokers, but same house. The buyer ended up, there was an extensive repair addendum connected with this, very extensive, and a very high-end home. So the listing, the seller ended up hiring, believe it or not, my husband as a general contractor to oversee the repairs, not necessarily to do the repairs, but to oversee them, just because it was such a high-end thing. So one of the things that was required was to replace light bulbs that were burned out. And this house had a lot of them, had a huge vaulted great room that required scaffolding to get up to the upper lights. And so they built in this great room a huge scaffolding, brought in the scaffolding, and they were really concerned about this glass table that was right there in the middle of the room. Very careful to not do anything to damage this glass table. We're very conscientious about that. Got up there, we're changing the light bulbs, and then found out that the table was not the valuable thing in that room. It was valuable, but not anywhere near the rug that was on that the table sat on. It was the rug. The rug itself was insured for $400,000. It was a handmade Persian rug, and the scaffolding was smack on top of it. As they moved it around, they could have ripped that rug. It is something just to be aware of. And again, my husband is a licensed, bonded, insured contractor. His insurance would have covered this. But in the case of us representing a buyer or representing a seller, and we're doing things outside of our license, you know, and if there's any questions about that, the seller's advisory and the buyer's advisory at OAR talk about what we can and cannot do as agents. So I just want to make sure we're aware of that and be careful when someone asks you to step in there and do things that are outside of our scope, that outside of what our insurance will cover. And if you have questions on that, please see me, but also review what is in the sellers and the buyers advisories, because it talks about how we are not experts in home inspections. We are not experts in general contracting and handyman work. We're not experts in these things. We can give referrals, we can provide people with names of people who are the experts. Any questions on that? Again, I don't want to step on people's toes, but I'm also concerned that in some cases we are doing things that is outside of our scope, our Any other questions, guys? So I'm going to open this up for any other general questions that anyone may have. And I will also, again, send you guys the links. I've talked about this recently, the buyers and sellers advisories, great risk management tools.
I have a question, Linnea.
Yeah, hi, Joe.
What is the latest situation with COVID and showing or listing properties with tenants in it?
That's a great. Yeah, we can. We can definitely do that. We have to follow the COVID guidelines. It's harder. It really is, because with COVID in place, and also if those tenants have not been paying their rent, you know, the governor's moratorium is keeping any evictions for non-payment of rent in place. So they can't be kicked out because of that. However, that doesn't negate the fact that if the buyer for that property intends to live in there, they still can be kicked out. They have to be given a 90-day notice. And so that is still the law. That has not changed the fact if we have a buyer who intends to occupy the property, or their immediate family member intends to, in this case, a grandma and granddaughter as immediate family member, they intend to, granddaughter will be moving into the property grandmother buys, that definitely still means that tenant can be kicked out. But we still have to follow proper COVID techniques. And I know there are some tenants out there who are refusing showings due to COVID. I've heard that. And that makes it harder. It definitely does make it harder. It really, in that case, it comes down to what's between the lease of the seller and their tenant, or maybe if they have a property management company, what the property management company has written into the lease with that tenant. And it's challenging, Joe, it is.
But if it's a buyer that comes in on a property,
Mm-hmm.
the tenant can be given 90-day notice right now, right?
Yes, yes. And the notice starts upon ratification of the contract. It's not once the listing's taken. It's once you have a ratified contract. So the tenant can be given, and that's the obligation of the seller to provide that notice. And I believe they have to provide them with a copy of the contract or some way of officially notifying them that they now have a buyer for the property who intends to move into the property. If the buyer does not intend to move into the property, just wants it as a rental or an investment property, that tenant has the right to stay.
The leases don't have to be observed if the buyer is going to move into it?
If you're past your first year. So if you're within, say the tenant is a month to month, and they're or they have an 11-month lease, and the lease does have to be observed, yes. But if they're past their first year lease and now they're on a month to month, the month to month continues on. They can't be kicked out. This is statewide rent control. So unless the buyer, unless they're not paying their rent, or they can be kicked out for cause. They're doing something they're not supposed to do in there. They've got, I mean, I heard someone who they said no pets. Well, these tenants ended up with service animals, you know, which really were more pets than anything else. But they had a doctor who said they had to have those service animals. So that tenant technically was in violation of the terms of their lease, but they got away with it because of the service animals. But if they are in violation of the lease terms, they can be kicked out for cause. But now if they're not paying their rent, they can't, because of the governor's moratorium on evictions through the end of the year now for COVID. So I don't know how many people are abusing that, who don't necessarily have COVID excuses, but that is still something that I'm seeing. But again, if someone's going to be moving into the home, they do have the right to give them a 90-day notice if they're past that first year. So if you have a rental property and you're concerned about that, I would always say give them 11-month lease, and at the end of 11 months, they're out. Then you can get a new tenant in there at a different rate or whatever you wanted to do.
Okay,
Did that answer your question, Joe?
I think so.
Okay. Yeah, I know it's a little tricky. Again, if they've lived in there less than a year, you can get them out for just a normal 30-day notice. I don't think that's the case in Portland. Portland has stricter guidelines than the rest of the state. But if they live there less than a year and they're on a month-to-month, you can get them out on a 30-day notice. If they've lived there more than a year, it requires a 90-day notice. And if you have more than 4 rentals, you actually have to pay the relocation costs.
And if they have a lease, it has to be honored.
Yes, the lease has to be honored. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, thanks.
Yeah. Any other questions?
I do, Linnea.
Yeah, hi, Jane.
Hi. 2 things. Sheila mentioned if we could get a copy of the input form and highlighted areas,
Yeah.
which need to be filled out. I think that would be super useful. And also, does anybody have a direct contact with the city for planning and zoning?
Direct contact. Are you talking about a specific planner?
No, a question about a specific property in the historic district. You can't get through to anybody at the moment. The offices are closed, or the only way you can reach them is via a generic email.
Yeah, I know with COVID, it's been harder to get questions answered. I put a call out yesterday myself to the city. I left a message with the person who was on schedule to respond that day, and I haven't heard back from them yet. So I don't know. I'm sorry, I don't have an answer for that, Jane. I would think just do a generic out there and hope someone gets back with you, and if they don't get back with you in a day, do another and say this is your second call. And if they don't get back that day, say this is my 3rd call. Maybe someone will get back to you at that point.
Sometimes it's helpful to
Yeah.
email them too, and they do get back to you.
Yeah, Colleen, I couldn't hear what you said there. What was that?
Oh, email works
Email?
today, email.
Thank you. That's good.
Thanks, Kelly. I did email them this morning. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Mhm. Does anyone else have anything? Any other questions, or do we have haves or wants? Anything else that anyone can contribute? If you have something going on, something, a new listing? Boy, listings are a key right now.
I have a have or a want, actually, sorry.
Yeah, hi, Leah.
Hi, I have a cash buyer in town for the week. She is looking for anything in the southwest neighborhood under 600,000.
Under 600.
They're
Southwest.
looking
Okay.
3-2, preferably with an office. There's been a couple of sales on like Rock Bluff, Gooseberry, those types of things. So the closer she can get to the river under 6, the better. There's 3 houses out there currently, and so if you have anything coming up, let me know.
I will. Thank you.
Thanks.
Anyone else have or wants? I can tell you our listings are just flying out the door. It seems like every new listing we get has multiple offers. So it's challenging times for people representing buyers. Okay, if we don't have anything else, what we will do is we will take the data input sheet, highlight those areas where we definitely are getting a lot of mistakes, and explain where you would find the information that would pertain to that. And then hopefully that will help immensely when Emily is doing input, and making sure that we have done correctly from the start. It will speed up the whole process. So that way, when we get our listings that have to be in tonight for tomorrow's, she's not delayed by having to look up all the stuff herself. So thank you guys for listening to that. And if you have any questions on anything, feel free to contact us. I'll be in the office all day today. And thank you so much. Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Linnea.
Thanks, bye.